One. Welcome again. We were hoping to have some continuity or a little more consistency in terms of the presentation for our series, or we look at our language. But as the saying goes, life gets in the way. So we're still appreciative that many of you are still interested in kind of following us and understanding a little bit more of some of the interpretations we may have as to how our language has impacted the world, how we see our own language, and in fact, how important it is for us not to take for granted the fact that our language, whatever you call it, patois, spoken word in Jamaica, is truly impactful. And that was the premise on which my original stories were being told. How a small piece of the earth, few people, relatively speaking, 3 million people, or language or arts or culture in general, has impacted the world in a meaningful way. And we see it in pop culture, we see it in sports, we see it in academia, we see it in literature, we see it in dance, we see it in music, we see it all over the globe in every aspect of our lives. But the fundamental part of our culture and our lives is the language, because that is how we interpret our dance, or we interpret our art, or we interpret our poetry, or we interpret our written word, or spoken word, the lyrics in our music. And hence, it is imperative that we kind of get a perspective as to the language. Again, I'm joined by my brother, Anthony Perry, who is a language arts expert. He chose not to put the word expert at the end of my description of him, but so be it. It is what it is. And just remember now, in the current scheme of things, we see how impactful a man like Bob Marley is in the world stage, who in the late 60s, early 70s, was seen as a pariah, was just seen as a man out there, a Rasta man just holding on to his own. And now he's part of the discussion as to how either put him on the money or become a national hero. And Bob Marley never spoke in anything but what he knew. His lyrics, many of which were written by other people, many of which were written by him, spoke to the world. The language was universal. And that is what we are talking about here. Our universality has encapsulated what we are as a people, our language, our dance, our music, our poetry. So once again, my brother, I just wanted to put your perspective on it, and I would, let you lead and go ahead.
Yes, Paul, we're back at it again. And there's so much to say, and as we've tried to have glossed over much of what I call the fundamental issues about language acquisition and language use. But at the heart of our conversation about the Jamaican patois, or the Jamaican language, or Jamaican, whichever definition you want to put to the language, at the heart of it is about where does this language place you as a person, as a human being, somebody with rights, first of all, in your own country and in the wider world. Over the last several decades, there's been much conversation, debate about where Jamaican patois, the Jamaican Creole, resides within our education system. And as much as I want to believe, or people hearing me might say, oh, this man is one big hypocrite, listen to him. I am fairly fluent and competent in the use of English. But oftentimes, Paul, when I travel outside of Jamaica, there are some of our colleagues in the Eastern Caribbean who just love to hear Jamaican talk, the Jamaican talk, or they want to hear Jamaican speak. At the same time, I love to hear the lyrical swings of the Trini speak. When a Trinidadian say, oh God, it creates a whole kind of sensation that you can't ever imagine. And I'll give you a little clip. I will come back to Jamaica. I went to a meeting in Trinidad, and I love curry. I love bus up shot. I love roti. And the night I flew in, two of my colleagues say, Anthony, let's go and have some curry. I said, I can't leave. I have a paper to present in the morning. You go get the curry and you can take it back to me in the hotel. I'm going to cut the story short, but I want to just make the point about the language.
You think, my brother?
So they brought the roti, and if you're not a Trini, if you never had Trini roti, curry is not a thing you put per meat, you know. Curry is a process. It's a gourmet that Trinidad and Guyanese talk about. Everything they do is curry. It's not just a powder we Jamaicans have sprinkled on chicken and call it curry chicken. It is a process for them. All kind of things, you know, bus up shot, spinach, potato, chana, curry mango. Well, I don't know if you ever eat curry mango. Anyway, Paul, it was delightful. I ate and I ate the night, and I finished my work and I went to bed. And about 1 o'clock, I woke up sweating and my stomach started to do all kind of gymnastics. I felt like I was going to pass out. I got through the night with very little sleep, and I went to the front desk and I said, what do you have? What can you recommend? I couldn't even have breakfast. They said, what happened to you? I said, I had curry last night. Here the woman at the front desk, oh God, you eat curry last night? You eat curry last night? The curry was stale, man. I eat curry night. Oh. No. And she gave me some Angostura bitters in water. And Paul,
1, 2, 3, you're good to go.
it went.
Yes.
I went on campus at St. Augustine, and they said, when you go on campus, get some liquid to replace. And I went to the pharmacy, and the pharmacist repeat the same story.
Yes.
Don't eat curry after dark. You don't know when curry stale. Oh my God. Trini.
Yes.
Nobody has ever said to Trinis that them speak badly. They speak differently.
Yes.
What we have here in Jamaica is almost like a self-hate when it comes to our language. And as I said in an earlier conversation with you, some of us believe that you can only, two things you can do with Jamaican language is cuss and entertain people.
Yes.
So a lot of people would laugh when they hear Louis Bennett. Louis Bennett made profoundly deep psychosocial, philosophical, historical commentary about life in Jamaican.
Yes.
What we have here, Paul, and we're working at it because we have the linguists who have looked at the language in all its forms and say it is a language that is to be learned. Because Paul, as much as you and I speak some versions of received English, in fact, I will talk about this received pronunciation, because B-A-T-H has a different pronunciation depending on part of England you are. M-U-G and C-U-P have different pronunciation depending on what part of England you are. Just like here in Jamaica, Paul, the vast majority of the educated elite speak, write, and hear in their circles, in education, in the professions, some form of standard British English. But if you were to go to Murray Mountain, I don't know if you know where that is, or Claverty Cottage in Portland, Murray Mountain in St. Anne, Claverty Cottage, them call it Upper Cloud, deep in the Swift River Valley.
In the Swift River Valley, yeah.
You hear a patois that probably you and I might need a translator for.
I'm aware of some of that.
okay?
Mhm.
And it's an understanding by our sociolinguists that there are even variations in the language. What the Jamaica Language Unit at UWI has been doing over the many, many years is to actually develop a spelling and a writing form for the Jamaican language. Now, depending on if you read the writings of Carolyn Cooper or you read the writings of Hubert Devonish, you might have some trouble because, Paul, when you look at the language written, you know, it looks formidable and
Yes,
foreboding.
yes, indeed.
So they've taken time to develop a spelling and a pronunciation for what we now consider to be the Jamaican language.
Right.
I think Jamaican is spelled Jamaikin, language Languij, language.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to take a little diversion. Paul, the battle, and I call it a battle, it's a linguistic battle between English and Jamaican. It's a battle which goes on all over the world. Wherever there's a first language, which is the dominant language of those in power, those in the professions, the other languages, national or regional dialects, are often marginalized and people are put down by it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Let me give you an example. If you went to the Université de Paris, or you went to the Sorbonne, you will acquire a certain French different from the people in Calais. But in the same way, if you go to Oxford and Cambridge, where you learn the BBC, receive the pronunciation, because we know some of our people here in the Caribbean who have gone to England, gone to university, and when they come back home, you could not believe that they were Jamaicans. They were born here. At the same token, there are Jamaicans who migrated from the Windrush up to the 1970s, 80s, Paul, who come out of rural parts of Jamaica. If you hear them now in parts of London and Birmingham, you would have thought they have just stepped out of rural Clarendon or St. Thomas into the UK. But what many of them have also learned is what we know as the code switching.
Yes.
So
Yes,
they use, and the
and
one
to their advantage, depending on the situation that they're in, and so on and so forth.
I don't know if I said to you the example, there's a Kai Miller, he's a Jamaican who is a professor at a US university. He writes, and he's a poet, he's a short story writer, and he has this delightful poem about a Jamaican woman who came home for the holidays from England, and she returned through Heathrow. So the customs officer is going through her luggage, and she's in a clipped British accent. When he asked her everything that was in her bag, she told him, oh, this is lunchiqua, oh, this is, bammy, oh, this is roast breadfruit, we have escovitch fish. But the more he dug into her bag, what we call her English began to disappear because she was becoming very angry. So by the time he reached to the cerasy bush, she broke away and she tore him up.
Hilarious.
And by that time, a whole long line had gathered behind her in Heathrow.
Yes.
And when she was finished and the customs officer closed back her suitcase, everybody applauded.
Right.
I don't know if they understood anything she said in Jamaican,
right.
But certainly her body language and her tone told them that I'm not happy.
Right.
And you're detaining me and I want, land with the plane. You think I today me a fly? Me wake up from 4 o'clock this morning to catch plane for come to Kingston and you come dig up in my bag for ask me where me I carry come to England. Mom, move you.
Right.
And so it is.
Yes.
But what I would like our listeners, and I'd love to hear some of the comments because, I have so many anecdotes about the switching.
Yes,
know,
yes, indeed. Mhm.
a certain Jamaican walked into a Jamaican store in Tampa, very polished. He was a professor at a university in Florida, and he said, tell me, do you have any patties here? The woman looked at him and realized that he was a Jamaican and said, "Me no sell patty, yes, sir." And it deflated him. You see what the language does?
Yes.
One, he wants pride of place and treatment with his English, and she does what?
Deflates it.
Puts him down a
Yes,
bit.
a bit.
On his way out of the shop,
Yeah.
he sees what he considered to be a Rasta man,
Yeah.
black, and says, "What the man I say?" And the man looked at him, quite bemused, because the man didn't understand what was just said.
To him.
He assumed by the way the man looked and his hair that
Yes.
he must have known Jamaican.
Yes.
What I'd like our listeners, what I'm trying to get across here, Paul, is how we have privileged some languages over the other. And I use the example about where first languages have become languages of power and control and domination. And it is used heavily in law, in medicine, in engineering,
Yes.
and in our classrooms. And here's where, here in Jamaica, we're grappling with, and you probably heard the report, and many Jamaicans are distressed about all kinds of things here at home. And of course, you and I have had our off telephone conversations about the distress that some of our people have in the diaspora, which is a word I have, every time I hear it, I almost want to cringe because I really want to know what is this thing. I don't want to beat upon me and fling a rockstone upon me. This thing, this phenomenon of the diaspora.
People with their foreign, right?
Right. Well, it's not only, it doesn't only live a foreign part, it's that they live in the United States or Canada or in Europe,
Yeah.
and they still have this passion and a nostalgia, not reminiscing, this nostalgia to go back to the way things were in
Yes.
their time.
And I speak about that all the time. So that's a story for a different time. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
But Paul, those of us who have undergone the grammar school, and please note, the grammar school education were schooled in standard English. And we had a bit of that in an earlier conversation. So all the grammar schools you see all across Jamaica, whether it's the Mannings in Westmoreland, or the Rossies in Hanover, or the Monroe Trust School for Girls, or the Titchfields, were all grammar schools that modeled English secondary education.
Was Woolmer's one of those schools?
Woolmer's was a trust school
Yeah.
set up by John Woolmer to give those off-white, near-white, an opportunity to go to school in Jamaica because they couldn't afford to send back their children to.
Okay, interesting. I didn't even know that.
Differently,
anyway.
Differently from Titchfield, slightly, because Titchfield was a trust school set up primarily to educate the children of the working poor. Beckford and Smith, which is now known as St. Jago, was also one of those schools. But I'm using those examples to say it is deliberate in the education that they start off with English. So what did they teach you in high school, Paul? You studied Shakespeare. You did British history. You did European history.
Yes, indeed.
I remember singing in what was called Eisteddfod. Those of us old gray-haired people like me, that was a German word for a festival of music. Yes, yeah. Eisteddfod. I sang a song that I knew nothing about.
Yes.
Home on the range where the deer and the antelope roam. What? Sorry. I get animated every time I think about it. Where the deer and the I didn't know what a deer looked like. Of course, there are deer roaming now in the hills of Portland.
Yes.
You're aware of that?
Yes,
somebody brought in some deer.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Right, so deer is no But when I was at Titchfield in the 60s, deer and antelope, I couldn't even imagine. I also sang in French festival.
Yes, indeed.
Sur le pont d'Avignon. I know where d'Avignon is a city in France. You see what I'm saying?
And on and on and on, my brother. Let me tell
And
you.
it goes on. So
Yes.
we come back to this
Yes.
business of our Jamaican.
Yes.
Please remember, Paul, like English, the British English, our Jamaican language has been fashioned out of survival.
Yeah.
It comes from tree, it comes from Ashanti, it comes from Spanish, it comes from English, it comes from Portuguese. Okay?
Yeah.
And there is no equivalent. When we say nyam, different from eat, we know what we mean. So the conversation that is still ongoing here is where to situate the Jamaican language within the status of this country. And just to give you two examples, St. Lucia, the Governor General at her throne speech, I hate that phrase, throne speech, come again from Britain, the irony is, delivers the throne speech in standard English and in St. Lucia Creole. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the same thing.
Same thing.
But there's a view here that when our governors general or our prime ministers or our leader of opposition, every now and again you hear them broke away. But Paul, when they break away to anglicize it,
Yeah.
it is usually to make a point.
Yeah.
And it's not a reflection that they feel that they need to connect with the vast majority of most of us who will understand where Brookway mean.
Yes.
Other thing I'd like to us our listeners to appreciate is that language, the Jamaican language is dynamic. It is constantly changing.
Constantly changing, my
So
brother.
words and phrases that you and I grew up hearing on the streets, if you went into inner city Kingston, nobody would know what you're talking about. And the flip side of that is that you could need an interpreter if you have a conversation now with some youth in inner city. Okay? While I'm saying that, persons have been coming to Jamaica to learn the language. I walked into the office of the graduate students office at UAT Mona. And I walked through the door and I heard a conversation between one of the administrative officers and a student. Paul, I had to stand in my tracks because who faced me? A Japanese. He was far more fluent in Jamaican than I was. He had come to Jamaica, and you know how we learned the language, which is what I've learned. They have been doing a number of years, is that they don't come to stay in uptown. They go and live in the inner city. They live, eat, work among the people,
Socialize, yes.
go to them session.
Go to the store.
That is how they learn
go to the
language.
marketplace. Yes, indeed.
And if I were to learn French again, we talk about immersion.
Yes.
Is that you're not taught about the language, but you immerse yourself in a French-speaking environment.
Yeah, man.
But even when we talk about Jamaican patois, let me give you another example. So Canada has two official languages, French and English. But if you go to the province of Quebec, Quebecois French is not the French you hear on the streets of Paris. I had a student at the University of Toronto who I was mentoring, and he came from Zaire. Now, Zaire is one of these
French colonies
countries that were colonized by the French. So he thought that if he moved to Quebec, it would be easy for him to integrate because he knew French from Zaire, and Quebecois, Quebec is French speaking.
Rude
Paul,
awakening.
he had a very rude awakening.
Indeed.
As far as he was concerned, is that he would learn a different language. And yet, when he moved to New Brunswick in the northeast of Canada, where there are a number of French-speaking New Brunswick residents, his French, he found that he could get along much easier with his Zairean French than he could in Quebec. But why am I using those examples, Paul? I'm using those examples to signify that some Jamaicans' obsession with this fact that if you don't know standard English, and somebody has to tell me what that is, or speaking correctly, you can't get on in the world. Tell that to a whole group of Jamaican creative people. I made a point to you, one of our private conversations. The Bob Marley biopic, whatever you call it, is now the rave. There are no subtitles.
No subtitles, my brother. And
there are no translated Jamaican into standard English for anybody, any part of the world.
Anywhere, anytime.
What does that say? And why do we have to wait on a Bob Marley film?
Indeed.
Where the language spoken is Jamaican, with some variations across different socioeconomic groupings. Why it has to take a movie, and this is controversial in itself, what I'm saying, for us to say, hey, this is our language. I don't have to preach up my Jamaican so that you can understand. And again, I say to people, if someone is speaking in Jamaican and you don't understand, what do, Paul? You get a translator. If you go to United Nations, people gather for conferences from all over the world, they have a translator, or they have translators. The assumptions we make that every Nigerian understands English is also false. There are so many variations in Nigeria of languages.
Yes.
You move from one village to the next, a different language, and people interchange because some of the languages are fairly close.
Right.
I am not saying that if you move from Clarendon to Manchester, you have to get interpreted.
Yeah.
If you move from Evergreen in Manchester and you move to Santa Cruz in St. Elizabeth, because generally speaking, there are words and intonations and pronunciations that are consistent.
Yeah, however, people within their own communities have their own variations of the language that they use. And once if they come out for a moment, or they come out for a trip, or they go to school someplace else, there is some kind of immersion into the way other people speak and the way other people relate to the language. I understand that, because at the end of the day, we're going to close off, because I think we still need to look at how it is that the whole question of class and how certain kinds of people in the Jamaican society look at language, and how it is used in people in positions of power, people who are employers, and people who create, and people who are artists, people who are at a certain, aspect of the society. So we need to kind of look at that as part of our final.
Well, it is, and language acquisition and language use is so complex.
Yeah, man.
Because how do you explain? And I use this example in a previous conversation. How do you explain this little girl? She's in must be grade 5 in a primary school in St. Margaret's Bay, right? Whose English is standard Jamaican English, while her siblings speak Jamaican, her parents speak Jamaican, and her family members are well, I won't say astounded. They said, how did she come to learn this language? Because it's not that actually she's in a community where she hears standard English, standard Jamaican English all the time. So there are those variations. And again, I defer to the experts, the sociolinguists, and if you talk one of the world's most foremost linguists who resides in the United States, Noam Chomsky, there is such a debate about how people come to know a language. Yes, and on all their variations and all the rules, and of course, as he said, some of the rules in grammar, people just made them up.
Yes, indeed. So
People
with that,
made them up.
with that,
You know,
with that, we're gonna end this segment. But I just like to say this. For the most part, from what I have seen, is that people don't relate to the writings and the missives and the lectures of the erudite and the academicians, like in Jamaica, the Rex Netterfords or the poets. But we relate more to the Louis Bennetts or the Oliver Samuels or the Bob Marleys. And the reason why, in general, people gravitate, not because of the entertainment factor, but primarily because of the language. The language emboldens them, the language, they can relate to the language easier without having to decipher some pseudo-intellectual discourse that some people might have about whatever it is that is in the news. The music, the lyrics, the discussion about the marketplace, the discussion about going to school, the discussion about going to church, in a form that they can simply understand. Because at the end of the day, when people are reasoning, it is so much more effective when the language you speak is easy to interpret. And for that, we have to embrace and understand that our Jamaican language, I don't care the fact that I can write, and I can read, and I can comprehend quote unquote standard English. When I'm amongst my peers, it is imperative that the language we speak, we just absorb it,
Paul, I just want to interject here because one of the issues that some critics of the Jamaican language make is that it's not a written language, it's mainly an oral language.
Yeah.
And what the Jamaican language UE does is come up with a writing.
So we're gonna get on with that on our next episode. And as I say, sometimes we're hoping that we can keep some consistency, but as I say, life gets in the way, and sometimes we simply can't. So I'm just hoping that we can.
And our colleagues have to know that language is dynamic, it's constantly changing. The words and phrases we use today, Paul.
Yes.
IT has changed language. Computing has changed the language of English.
Unbelievably so. Yes, indeed. And
people might also say, Paul, that IT languages has a maleness in it.
Yes. Yes.
It's almost misogynist, say, the language of IT. But that's a different conversation.
Story for a different.
Absolutely.
Yeah, man. So once again, Rada, much love. Really appreciate you coming out. The vibe we're getting is very positive, and I'd like to see some feedback on this. I'm going to be posting this within the next 24, 36 hours. And we just keep the conversation going, because it is the root, is the foundation of our culture, whether it is the food, the dance, the poetry, the art, whatever.
And in the stories that our grandparents and our parents pass on, the oral language, and you get how people think and understand, and how they relate to them environment through the language.
Thank you, sir. With that, good night.
Well, good.
Brother.
All right.
Good. Take care. As we say, well, go and take it easy.